Hello, my friends. How are you? Sorry, I'm just drinking some water. How's everybody doing today? Big announcement. We've got a YouTube channel finally. So these conversations with Jon are now up on the YouTube channel LiveWithMattRad. So you can go there and subscribe. We have clips up there as well. I'm going to bring Jon on right now. So yeah, if you go to YouTube, search for Live with Matt Rad. The first 2 episodes are up. And what's up, buddy?
Hello.
How are you?
Feeling good.
Good. I was just in the middle of saying the YouTube channel is up now, so people can go to YouTube Live with Matt Rad. The first 2 episodes of us talking here, chopped up and adjusted a bit, as well as a few clips, because of course in our conversations we get onto rants about particular topics and things. So folks can check that out. I've been DMing some people who've been giving feedback and letting people know.
Amazing. So exciting.
So it's good, man. It's
people don't have to stay on Instagram for the whole hour.
Yeah, all these conversations are on my IGTV, but I think a lot of people find it easier to go on YouTube and do things that way. I certainly do. And I was hoping to and shout out Francesco for all his hard work making that happen. He's been working with me on this stuff and getting that together. So thank you, Francesco. He's been working really hard. I was hoping to have audio versions of the podcast as well. And it turns out that to launch a podcast, you need, there's a time period for approval of various services. So those are actually ready, but we just don't have them yet because we need Apple and Google and all these people to approve what we're doing to make sure there's no hate speech or whatever's going on with it.
Oh man, be careful. I have some plug-in hate speech.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody in the DMs. They're talking about the various companies that you're like, I fucking hate those speakers or those. It's going to be great. Yo, how are you feeling today after sprinting yesterday?
I'm thinking about going for another one later up the bridge before dinner tonight. I'm kind of addicted to it. I wasn't able to bike ride this morning. I was just sore enough where I thought I should probably rest. But I'm not really tight. Thankfully, stretching helps, but definitely sore. And my back feels strengthened, which feels weird. So my back doesn't hurt as much today as it did yesterday while we were doing it. So that felt interesting.
Doing exercise strengthens muscles.
It does.
It turns out.
So I feel great today. I want to do it again. I'm stoked.
That's great, man. I highly recommend to everyone, if you want to maximize your workout, just go sprint a hill. Warm up and then sprint a hill. It's the best.
Can you send me that warm up?
I'll send you that warm
tonight.
Up.
Thank you.
The super bro on YouTube who does a 5-minute warm up. He's very excited. There's a lot of EDM music on. So we talked yesterday about. You had a couple ideas, which I want to do, and maybe it's this time, maybe it's not, about some
I'm open
some
to anything.
What's that?
I'm open to anything.
Well, we got a bunch of really good questions. So maybe we start with some questions, and if we kind of get through them, then maybe we can launch into the thing you and I were talking about yesterday.
Yeah, let's engage the community.
Engage the community. So there's a couple of questions. One which might happen quickly. Because it's sort of like the answer is kind of like, I don't know. I had a different answer 6 months ago. But Spencer asked, how vital is it to what we do being in LA or New York, or like being in a central hub? And as you would probably say the same thing as me, which is we have an answer that would have been great 6 months ago. But now with the pandemic and especially the US being, having a rough go of it. I don't know. Do you want to give your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts on it. I think about it on the daily. It took me a long time to fall in love with LA. It took me, probably up until I moved into this place to fall in love with LA. So I've been here for 5 years, and total 10. So it took me 5 years to say I like it here, I guess. If this place that I'm in right now, let's see if we can just share it a little bit. Josh is over in the studio. This place, it's hard to do. I don't know. This place is kind of cool. I love it here.
It's a great spot.
It's really inspiring for me. I love when other people can come over and work and feel inspired by it as well and be around, which is not what's happening in the pandemic. So I miss that community in the space that LA offers. And people are doing that with masks on, I'm sure now. I don't really feel safe with people I don't know in my studio, which is my home at the moment. And that specifically because it's my home. Josh, one of my engineers, main engineer, he is here once, twice a week to do deliverables, and he's being really careful, and we take that really seriously. Do we have to be in LA? No. I think the simple answer is no, we don't. I think for writing sessions, you needed to be, and now it's almost impossible to be in them legally, I guess. So if you're doing it with a mask on, I guess that's cool, but ventilation is so important right now. And how many studios have proper ventilation? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that and how good the ventilation has to be for it to be safe. The question is still out about surface transmission of this virus. So if we're talking about it now, I say the answer is simply no. You don't have to be. If you wanted to take a creative trip to make beats or mix records somewhere else, and that would be the time, because no one's showing up. I've mixed so many songs in the past couple of months during this, and nobody has shown up or asked to.
I would have said, pre-pandemic, if somebody said, hey, I make music, I live in wherever, increasingly the internet allows you to make things and disseminate things and put them on streaming services and interface with fans directly and other creatives. But I would still tell everybody, again, this is before all this, come to LA, go to, I don't even know if New York is really a spot anymore for music in the same way.
Some people are trying to make it that way. It's different, but there's a lot of people out there.
Yeah, and it's not to denigrate any other place, but like LA and London, just kind of where everybody is moved in the last decade or so, especially LA. A lot of people coming to LA because there's so much space and the weather's nice and there's just so many creative people here. The idea of being in a place where you're going to go and you'll meet creative people at bars and restaurants and everybody has sessions and everybody's trying to do something. And as much as people talk about LA, I think correctly that there's a lot of kind of superficiality and hustle. It's still with an intention of making things, and it's not all bullshit. There's a lot of really interesting creative people here. But so I again, 6 months ago, I would have said LA is the place. LA is increasingly the place. For music, for art, for fashion, for everything. How to talk about it now is
well. The simple answer to the actual question is yes, you should be, but during a pandemic, go wherever you feel most comfortable, creative, and safe. Because nobody's coming over to do it. LA, but let's not forget that this will end at some point, and this is still the hub of, I would say, this at least the songwriting scene for America, where this is where the major publishing companies are located and putting their people in sessions. You can pull up on someone really easily, which is kind of how the most organic sessions even happen amongst friends. So if you're homies with someone, you might as well be around. So when they say they need a keyboard player, you're on call and you're there because you're working on beats. You can easily jump into their session. I think that part, I've gotten production work from being in the room as a mixer with someone to be like, oh, I heard you made beats, play me a beat. And then like all of a sudden there's a rap on top. Like that does happen. And that can't happen if we're interfacing via email entirely, which most of my life is that way. So I would say that if I didn't have this place and couldn't find a place, I would consider New York again, just because like Tom Elmers is in New York mixing all the time. Like no one's like, I don't want to hire him because he's in New York. Maybe one person that really wants to attend a session, but at the same time, if that's so important to you, there's two ways to fix that when we're not in pandemic. One is fly there to come work with that person, or if me for that example, or we can get PMCs set up in a room with an attack wall and work in LA. So it can be done either way, depending on deadline. So I'm switching my belief to live where makes you happy and safe and comfortable and creative. So I think I definitely am reprioritizing that in my brain right now. And if it wasn't for this place, I would have way different thoughts, I think. And other factors, but...
Yeah, it also depends what you're doing. If you are a mixer, the nature of the work is a little bit different. If you are a producer and writer who's doing sessions,
or a recording engineer that has to be in the room.
Recording engineer, yeah, exactly. Those those latter few require a bit more of a community and multiple job options and studios and people. And if you're a recording artist, it's probably just makes sense to come to LA and New York and London periodically, but you don't necessarily need to be here. And all this stuff is changing, at least again, in the ability to get your music out and interface with people. You're not going to need to be, in Los Angeles waiting for a record company to like you before you can do anything. But there's still a great advantage to having community. And again, without the pandemic, being in person, being at the studio, there's just exciting creative things that happen that way that just can't happen over a Zoom session and things like that, as much as we're trying to figure that out right now in the songwriting community.
I mean, even as simple as during a pandemic, masks on and all. Like, I was at a local coffee shop that's opening in my hood that's not even open yet. And I'm in there with the owners, just hanging out, having some Turkish coffee. And I get introduced to this dude who's a producer, but he also owns an olive oil company. I'm like, I need some local grown olive oil. Like,
that's your new best friend right there.
No, and he's so nice. And like, I want to, that's something that LA offers. Like, okay, you're a producer and you're doing this, but you're also like making olive oil. And I fuck with olive oil and I fuck with music. So that, I mean, maybe that can happen in a lot of places. That's more concentrated here. That opportunity to just vibe with someone quickly seems more regular out here. For someone that's a bit antisocial, I don't really say hi to people outside. I noticed you did it yesterday when we were running, and I thought about it today because I walked by a bunch of people. Maybe the mask part gets in the way of that. Like, can you even tell I'm smiling and having a good time in my life right now, walking to get coffee, or I bought eggs today. But yesterday you said hi to everybody that walked by us while we were running. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, Matt's good at that. I don't have that part of me. Once I'm introduced to someone, I can go on for a bit and feel good. But for that to have happened in the coffee shop is what makes this place kind of special to me, because more people are willing to do that. And then someone like me who's not can become engaged with them because they're open to saying, hey, what's up? I'm like, oh,
yeah. The communal aspect of what we do is obvious in some ways and not so obvious in other ways, and extremely important in all of those ways. And by the way, I don't know if this is a record, but only 11 minutes in, we got Jon talking about food automatically. So
God,
we're already there. It's great. It's great. Okay, let's see. The other question I got, which is a topic I could probably talk about for hours, which I love, which is from Kev: how to give constructive feedback, especially to friends. I love that question because it's something that I didn't do very well for a long time. Because I started recording, producing, playing in bands, making beats when I was like 12 or 13. And it wasn't until I was probably like 26 or 27 that I realized how to give feedback to people, which is, the short answer is, be honest and tell them what you think. Learn how to be honest and learn how to say things that are difficult. I mean, it's kind of a life philosophy thing that I think we could all get better at, which is be honest with people. And it's always going to be a little jarring in the moment. But there was a moment, again, sometime in my sort of mid-late 20s, where I'd tell people to send me songs. By the way, anybody's watching, you want to send me stuff, I'll give you feedback. Sometimes it'll take me a month to get back to listening to things. But I try to give real feedback to people because I realized at a certain point that telling, there's a time to be like, you're just supporting your friends and you want to be like, hey man, I love what you're doing. Keep going. Encouragement is really important. But if somebody says, hey, give me feedback, they want you to be critical of it. They want you to help them improve what they're doing. And once I kind of put myself in other people's shoes and said, I wouldn't be asking for your advice if I didn't want to get better at what I'm doing, I started giving thoughtful responses. Because if you just say, hey, this sucks, or that's no good, that's
never
not helpful.
Do that. Never do that. That's not helpful.
Somebody sends you something and the chorus doesn't quite have impact, or the mix isn't very good, you go, hey, it sounds like you're trying to do this kind of thing. Well, I would try this, I would try that. But philosophically, and then please give me your response too. If you're the sort of person that when asked for critical feedback, you give really honest critical feedback, you are in a rare place in that person's life where they know you will be honest with them, and they will come back to you for feedback, and they will put you in a different category than a lot of other people. If you're the person that gives honest feedback, even if it's critical, even if it's tough, if you say that shit with love, that's invaluable to creative people. As someone who wanted that for a long time, I wasn't able to flip and go, oh wait, this person wants, or it took me a while to flip and say, this person wants me to give them real criticism.
Yeah, I have a hard time. To me, it comes back to don't criticize unless you have some sort of solution, some way of enhancing their experience and what they're trying to do. So that's my first rule. Second rule is always start with a positive. Don't start ripping it about. So I had this experience recently, which was someone I met at a Terrace Martin masterclass randomly in down in Compton. There's an audio academy. I forgot what it's called. 1500 Academy, I think. It was fantastic. They were doing these master classes, and I went with a friend, and it so happened that and she was visiting town, and then it so happened this guy and her were both from the same part of Toronto, and they never met each other, but they were both there, and we got on really well. And he sent me a message last week, 2 weeks ago, saying, "Hey man, I don't know if you remember me. I met you at this thing." I was like, "Oh, I totally remember this guy. We had a great chat." So I already felt like, okay, he's remembering me. He wants me to tell him something that's going to help him in his journey. Like, we've already had conversations before. What's the best I can offer him? So I listened down to the 4 tracks, took my time with them, and I pointed out all the things that sounded unique to me of him. It's like, I've heard that guitar tone, I've heard this, I've heard that, but this thing that you did here is what sets you apart from. And I named like Tame Impala and The Weeknd and all these things that it kind of had this reminiscent sound of, to the point where it was like almost exactly that. But then there was this bit he would do with his guitar tone that sounded like, oh, I haven't heard that before. So I try to pick out the things that I haven't heard before that might make someone insecure of like, oh, that was the weird shit that I did. I'm always into other people's weird shit. Ingmar and I would always do this, where I would do a pass of a mix. Ingmar also mixes with the gift shop with Josh and I. And I would always hear the hidden stuff, and I would always turn it up way too loud to the point where you can love it or hate it. Someone's going to be like, ooh, I meant that to be subtle, or damn, I forgot that was even in there, right? So that's going to be my reaction anyway when I'm mixing a song. So why not point that out when someone's hiding their greatness in it, or hiding the weird stuff that like maybe they haven't heard, so doesn't resemble something that they're, you have to have familiar enough and then go slightly left. So I try to criticize towards that instead of, hey, the guitar sound is bright. It's like, what? I'm not giving you mix notes if you're asking for critical feedback on something. So start with the positive and only criticize what can be helped and resolved are kind of my answers to that question.
Yeah, yours is more nuanced than me. I think yours is a great approach. I definitely am like, hey, the guitar's too bright. Also, I like this thing. Repeat the chorus twice. Also, I may not know what I'm talking about, but here's my instant reaction. I think
but there's benefit in that. That's an arrangement note. You just gave arrangement. Like, repeat the chorus twice is a great note.
I try to give. It depends on what it is, but I get so much music and so many different things that people ask me about. Yeah, compliment and criticize. What I like to do is say, hey, here's my opinion. First listen. I might feel differently if I listen 10 times. Take my opinion with a grain of salt. Here's a bunch of vomit thoughts, and I just will write paragraphs or just say, here's what I think. Here's what I think. Here's what I think. Take it for what it's worth. Try stuff. I think it's great.
Let me just add to Jerry on that. I don't know if you have to compliment before you criticize. I think explain a positive, something that you vibe with, but I'm not sure that necessarily has to be a compliment of you did great on this or some sort of.
It gets to the point where you can run the risk of if it's formulaic, then you sound kind of patronizing. Be like, hey, it's great that you this, but also maybe this. Yeah, people can sense that coming.
Yeah, exactly. So the compliment part and the validation can be done without complimentary language. So I think that's important to,
I do.
You know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying. Yeah, that's a really interesting topic. I obviously in our conversations, I like.
Great question. Great question. I get asked every day, and I pick and choose when I can donate my energy properly towards giving criticism and feedback because I want to do it properly all the time. And I was on FaceTime with a friend, Danny Klein, producer of Some Randoms, the other day, and it's like I get hit up on the daily for feedback, beats being sent, all this, and I want to engage fully, but it's just impossible. So, but I'd rather not do it than do it half-assed. I think
totally. And that's why I always take forever to get back to people on things, because I'll do my listening and kind of usually in one sitting, especially with people I don't know. They're just like, hey, can I send you a bunch of songs? And sometimes it takes me a month or two. By the way, I just got an email alert right now saying your Apple podcast is approved. I don't know if that means that it's actually on Apple right now, but if people want to check, I'm going to go double check it after this and see. I think it's going to be up on Spotify shortly, and it'll be up on Apple. And then there's 12
so maybe
other
it's 4 weeks
services.
Like is just their runtime, but it could happen faster. Depending
well, it's also based on the service. Some of the services are like, we definitely are going to take a month to do this, but we'll see. So people can check that out.
Let's move on.
Somebody asked last week, Kreezed asked specs on computers. I know it's not something to get into super technically, do you have any thoughts at all? Whatever.
Something fast and powerful, so you don't have fan noise on at all time. So if you want to put an ambient loop or a white noise loop, it's not your fan first. I don't know. Like get something that works. Save money and invest in a machine that's your foundation to your creation. It's worthy of investment. You think about it in a similar way to maybe not exactly monitoring,
similar to monitoring. Yeah,
it's equally important. Without a computer, you can't hear the songs you're working on, and the same thing with speakers. So,
like a good computer that's going to be reliable, that's going to work quickly. It's not going to fuck up your workflow. Spend money on your computer and your monitoring.
Yeah.
That's good advice.
Let's move. Let's keep going.
Let's move. Let's see. There were a number of. It's actually something that I'm interested in too. There were a number of questions about density.
Mm-hmm.
Density. There's a question from Alex about density without loudness. Angel asked about sort of wall of sound techniques without getting things too busy.
If you put a Coke can in a bowl of water, it floats, and if you put Diet Coke in a Diet Coke can in water, it sinks. Apparently, different densities. Look that shit up. Some physics stuff. I don't know.
Damn, that's some physics shit. So how does that apply to mixes? The other question was about
don't use artificial sweeteners in your mixes. Decide what needs to be sweet and what doesn't need to be sweet, so it always floats.
It seems like density.
I don't know. I was trying.
Yeah, I like the attempt. When we've talked about density in the past, it really is a combination of, for lack of a better word, everything. It's a combination of arrangement. So are the parts running into each other note-wise? Are the sounds running into each other frequency-wise? Mm-hmm. When you're layering things on top of each other, are there EQ adjustments to make? Are you compressing or saturating, distorting in certain ways that are blending things together? It seems like the answer to density is it's a bit of everything. And to be frank, that's the thing that really good mix engineers know how to deal with. They understand the subtleties of, okay, this arrangement is good, but I can carve out a little bit here. I can boost this a little bit here. I can put a little more reverb on this here and separate, but still make it loud.
There's a few ways to come into this. When I think of density, I think of, am I creating the density, or am I how do I say this? What's creating the density? Is it the arrangement is dense, or is it a limiter or the mix bus that someone had on their mix, on their rough mix, that's creating the density, right? So, for example, I was working on this trap record today, right before I'm still working on it. I took a break and I'll go back after this. And it's so crushed together with a L3 or whatever, that ultra maximizer. I don't have waves, so as we all know. And it's just so, Josh was telling me how just smashed it was, right? So the density is coming from a limiter, not the arrangement. The arrangement has 6 elements in the whole track, and then a ton of vocals. But in the track, it's 6 elements. And it sounds, without that limiter, the song does not sound the same. The instrumental does not sound there's no representation of it in the raw sound. That to me is just kind of wrong. I don't know how else to put it. Like, sound design your sounds individually so then they take up the space you want without relying on a 9 to 10 dB reduction limiter. Like, that to me is so backwards, and it's actually really frustrating. So that's where I'd like to come at it from an arrangement standpoint, is make sure your arrangement is dense enough and placed in the right way, not relying on a limiter. We talked about that last time with when we talked about compression. This is why I'm so against the idea of compression as a go-to, as a necessity, is because that's how people are creating their density. When that falls apart, it all goes to shit. And that's not fair, because honestly, like I think, I mean, granted, everything is subjective. I think that my mix objectively is much better, way improved. Because of how limited it was, there's no sub frequencies, and it's a trap record with an 808. Like now it's sitting low and it's moving. You can actually hear the subtleties in the bass that are moving around. I couldn't tell the difference between any of the notes. Couldn't tell the difference between the kick and the snare, because they were so smashed that the pitch of the kick and the snare sounded exactly the same, because they each have hi-hats from like a sample loop. So it sounds, they sounded basically the same. And now there's a separation, there's a groove, and there's a feel to it. And without the limiter, now my nerve when I finish it today, when I send it to them, is that they're not going to like it because it sounds different. And they'll be unable to hear the improvement or feel the improvement because demoitis. And that's always the fear that happens with this. So what I did to improve my chances of success was I recreated the density, like we talk about with certain pieces of gear and certain tools, with exciters and saturation tools. So I could remake specifically where that limiter was hitting that kick that gave that upper mid-range of the kick that doesn't exist. Like if you look at the kick itself and put an analyzer on it, there's no top end to the kick or no mid-range to the kick. It's all low. But somehow the way it's hitting the compressor, all of a sudden there's like a knock to it. The knock, I swear to God, does not exist. So I have to recreate that density. So there are ways to recreate it without using an overall crushing limiter that's dictating the density of the record versus, do you actually have mid-range in your kick choice? Do you have that knock in the choice? Like most producers, I don't have to do that type of shit for, because they're, or at least the ones that I'm working on, that I don't have to fix as much and I get to enhance. Today was a little bit of a different story. Also, in the defense of the record, the vocal is one of my favorite vocals that I've worked on. This artist is so dope, and like I want her to slay. Like I'm giving it my all because I actually believe in this artist. So I'm not trying to complain about it. It's okay to make it bump and also have that texture and that density. There needs to be bold moves taken into account. So that's the way I think about density. You can always add it. It's hard to take it away unless you're just turning things down, but then your chances of beating the rough are minimal. But that's the reverse. The reverse would be it's so dense with no compressor on, everything's just loud. It's like, okay, maybe I guess that's when you start carving EQ and making minimal adjustments and doing surgical moves.
Well, so a lot of what you're talking about sounds like when you're talking about density is treating individual elements in distinct ways. Mm-hmm. So they have their own, for lack of a better term, identity. They sit in their own space. Sometimes that's frequency range. But
in the arrangement, dictated by the arrangement, not by a tool such as a compressor or a limiter dictating the arrangement.
So when
and the density.
I assume a lot of people have an idea of what arrangement means, but arrangement is the combination of both instruments and sounds, the elements that you have and how they interact with each other. And a lot of times across time as well. Yeah. So when something has maybe a bad arrangement, that can mean that things are static over the course of a song. Mm-hmm. And so things don't really ebb and flow and change. A bad arrangement might be, you have
everything exists in the low mids, and there's
everything
nothing
exists in the same frequency range, and not just equalization frequency range, but there's a guitar part that's roughly in the same melody range as the vocal, and so you don't get clarity there. I actually was working on a song that I wrote with an artist a couple of weeks ago, and he had sent me like 7 guitar ideas to put in this one section, and I loved this one particular sound, and I kept kind of poking at it every night because there isn't really a deadline. We're just writing for his next album. And I kept going back to it, and I was like, I want this to work. And I tried a different amp sound, and I tried a different EQ, and I tried some phasing, and and it just wasn't right. And then I realized the top note of the 2-note guitar part is right in line where the vocal is. And I just went, that's what it is. So I went and played a version of his guitar part in a slightly different voicing, and so all of a sudden the vocal and the guitar part sat like this, as opposed to being like the 2 notes on the guitar and the vocal were kind of doing this, and then all of a sudden it went like this, and it just absolutely opened up, and then it worked.
Yeah, see, that's a great point. I mean, I remember being in production sessions weekend with my partner at the time, and we would never, the tone would come up pretty fast because tones are tones, but you're always looking for that top note, that bottom note, what reinforces the melody. Like it could take hours to dial in the right voicing of a chord on a guitar for a pop song, and 4 minutes for the tone to be found, or 30 seconds to be. I mean, it's so much more important to think that way, arrangement wise. What's supporting and enhancing the melody and not distracting from? So yeah, I mean, I kind of think my experience as a producer is what led to that in mixing for me. I mean, I'm always in what I call solo mode for that reason. I just solo a few elements at a time and kind of see what's getting in the way. And granted, I only have control maybe over the frequency spectrum of that now that it's already desired. But with tools these days, if a note is ringing out too much in the guitar, I can get that out with EQ to a degree, at least enough to decoy it and create space for the melody to exist in that same range.
I've done that sometimes in the mix where I'll either triggering with the vocal or doing some multi-band compression on a particular area where there's a part that's just kind of stomping on the vocal and just pulling it out when the vocal sings.
Yeah, you can sidechain it to the vocal. And those
exactly.
Kind of moves. Yeah. And also back to the density thing and arrangement. I forgot what I was going to say. Damn, that sucks.
Somebody asked in there, are you putting saturation and things like that on individual elements versus mix bus stuff? And I think it's
not on mix bus, but subgroups and individuals, mostly individuals, but sometimes subgroups.
Yeah, just the idea of voicing things correctly in the arrangement, getting things out of each other's way, and then doing the same with EQ is sort of like, if you go step by step, it's like, create the arrangement so the notes and the sounds kind of add up, and then you get further and further along in the process. Then you start worrying about frequency ranges and things like that.
Yeah, I remember what I was going to say, and it has a lot to do with this. We should talk about filtering. I think filtering is a more important form of EQ than anything else. So when thinking about arrangement, you don't need talk numbers for a second. In a guitar, you don't really need 12K and up in the guitar. Like maybe if you're going for super hi-fi Steely Dan. Like, do you really want that though? Like really sparkly guitar? Maybe Mutt Lange would leave some of that in, but really you can condense that down, and proper monitoring is what lets you hear when you don't need above a certain area. Does your snare really need to crack at 8K when that's where the vocal is sitting? Like, you should really be specific on where. So I rarely do anything more than filtering on a lot of stuff, or just getting that bottom up to the right spot, getting maybe a phase bump at the bottom that gives a little poke in the lowest bit. And then same with the top. There's a filter on every sound in my session. Really? And that helps with density in the overall mix, because you're giving yourself the headroom. You're not letting things have too much low end when they don't need it. And obviously, use your discretion, because sometimes you want rumble and you want mystery and you want things that are not perfect on top of each other. I'm not talking about being the most precise that you can be with that. I think there's some leeway, but filtering to me is actually the most important EQ.
This is a really big thing, because I fuck this up a lot. I'm constantly. This is really good. This is going to change how I think about some things, and I've done bits of this before, and I never really stick to it. Whenever I'm listening to the drums of a beat I'm making, or I'm just like turning up high end, and I'm turning like I want the snare to crack more, so I turn up 8K and it cracks more, and that's awesome. And then when I'm getting into making it more dense, things are kind of the snare is not as clear, and then the vocals got to be louder, and then I'm turning everything up, and the reality is that snare drum should not have all that high end in this, for the most part, because that's where the vocal's going to sit, and the cymbals are going to sit in a slightly different place, and maybe the hats are going to, maybe the hats will be here, and the snare is here, and the vocals here, and the crash is here, and instead of having everything where I'm just cranking up high end because it sounds so good to me.
And to me, that's more of a pitch thing. That's like when you're producing, you're trying lower pitches of hi-hats, so you don't have to add brightness, or you're trying higher pitches. Sorry, you're going to raise the pitch of the hats. You don't have to add high end. You're just flipping it up until it's not in the way of the vocal, or it's so far above the vocal and then the vocal sitting below the hi-hat, depending on what you're going for, or pitch things down out of the way instead of darkening them, right? And that's in the producer world in arrangement. I do that in mixing too, just to see what I can do, or put like a heavy saturation tool, like a cassette deck, like Sketch cassette on a hi-hat, it completely changes the vibe of the hi-hat, sometimes magically for the better, or sometimes it's way too drastic and you're like, oh, that's too much. I think that you thinking about boosting high end is the go-to for something where you're like, oh, it's not bright enough.
I want it to be clearer. I want it to
exactly.
be, yeah.
And in fact, to me, it's the complete opposite. In fact, it's like, I want less of that to make it more clear, because you have less of that and it actually gives the fundamental of that sound more space to breathe, right? So say that hi-hat pitch is actually sitting at a peak on an analyzer at 4 or 5K. Why are you boosting 8K? That's not the sound, right? The sound itself, if you want it to sit in that range, you'd pitch it up 4 semitones, and then it naturally sits in that range. Now, I wouldn't want the hi-hat to be in that range necessarily, because that's where the vocal is supposed to sit, or a buzzy Prophet synth, the top of that sitting like between 10 and 15 for that air and that like crunch that like an analog synth actually gives. That buzz is kind of up there, depending on obviously where your resonant filter is set. But that's kind of notorious where those vintage synths sit, and nothing above it. They all have smooth roll-offs by like 15K.
What's something that philosophically is pretty interesting to think about, which I make this mistake a lot, so I can't imagine I'm alone in it, that listening to things in isolation is important to a point, but it's really how it all adds up, and it gets back to arrangement. This is arrangement, this is density, this is EQ, this is everything, where you're really, how everything adds up is ultimately the most important thing. I've received productions that I'm finishing or mixes that I've done where I'm surprised by how narrow of a set of frequencies the snare drum is and things like that, but it just cracks in the song because it has hi-hats and a vocal and a high synth and all that kind of stuff. And so, you know,
I have to say to that, I actually I can't remember the last time I soloed one element to work on it. That's something that is probably controversial, or
no, it makes a lot of sense based on what we're talking about.
I don't remember the last time I soloed one thing to work on, unless it was to get rid of a click or a bad edit or something. But to make an EQ move, I never EQ. So I think I could say that, 100%. I don't think I ever EQ alone. I might EQ with 2 elements, but I'll never solo to EQ. I think I did that when I was younger. And then everything sounded great individually, but then there was no glue together. I do that a lot. Yeah, I think most people do. And I think I did up until I met Tony. I think Tony was the one that kept saying, yo, you're soloed too long. Like he would solo things. We all do it. I don't actually think I do it anymore. But he used to. And if I did it for too long, he'd point it out. He'd be like, hey, man, you're like soloed too much. Or the other option is your vocal's muted for too long. Like, don't mix the instrumental for too long without the vocal in, because then you're going to mix around the vocal where the vocal's supposed to sit. At this point, I know kind of where I want my vocal to sit, so I can do it for longer than I think other people should, but that's a practice thing. I kind of know my handicap and where I want the vocal to sit, so I'm constantly just, I'm subconsciously scooping out regions for that to fit, for the vocal to fit in anyway. So I have good results. Somebody
said to me last night that, and I think this is pretty true. I think as far as music consumers, this is not true, but as far as music creators, everybody undervalues the vocal. Yeah. I think everybody doesn't pay enough attention to the vocal.
Besides the vocalist.
Besides the vocalist. And the vocal is the most important thing, the most important thing, the most important thing. It's what everybody remembers. You know, occasionally you'll remember, like a classic keyboard line from a hit song, but
yeah, counter melody.
But it's 99% of the time what people remember from the kind of music that we're making is the vocal, the melody, the lyric,
and the groove, and maybe the beat,
and the groove, and how it interacts with that. So when talking about arrangement, that's almost like you can, in my mind, think of it as a hierarchy. It's vocal, groove, and everything else. When you're talking about just arranging, producing, mixing, that sort of thing, it's vocal, groove, and then everything else, and everything else is kind of a distant third.
That's kind of why, exactly, it is. And our brains only can hear 3 different things at the same time anyway. So it's always going to compete for that thing. You don't want it to compete for the vocal. Nothing should compete with the vocal. And that's why I'm kind of against the vocal up note. Vocal up note to me at this point, because I love mixing vocals, is something's in the way of the vocal and needs to come down. Especially how fine my moves are with headroom and gain structure. The vocal is not too quiet. It's just something in the arrangement is getting in the way, and I might not have nailed the sculpting of that. So I don't remember the last time I just turned a vocal up. It's like, oh, that's the move. When someone asks for it, it's always, ooh, why are they saying that? And then you're kind of thinking psychologically about what's getting in the way of that and why they're not feeling the vocal where it's supposed to be. And it could be more of a presence EQ thing than a raise. Like every once in a while, I'll scoop out too much high mid-range in the vocal. Maybe I'm monitoring too loud or something. And then someone will say, oh, the vocal's not loud enough. And I'll double check that. And then I'll split the difference. I'm like, oh, that's it. Magic. What did you do? I'm like, oh, I don't, why do I have to tell you what I did necessarily? But I didn't turn the vocal up is the key to that answer. I don't believe in vocal up mixes. When everybody asks me, my response is, let's get it right. It's always that. And no one fights back. Like, oh, we need it. It's like, it's a thing to ask for. I don't think that's something that needs to be asked for.
I like the technique you were saying earlier about soloing in groups, soloing the vocal in a few instruments, soloing the vocal and drums.
The mute the drums mix is so fun. Like everything but drums, and see how the vocal is held in place. And then you drop your drums back in and you're like, wait, where'd the vocal go? That's when you realize you boosted too much high end on your snare and your hi-hats.
I've definitely done that.
That's a big move.
That's when people talk about, when we've talked about in some of these chats about references and having things translate, people are often talking about, let's listen to it on a laptop, let's listen to it on a phone, let's listen to it in the car, what is your monitoring setup? But listening in different combinations of instruments is a really great way to get perspective on your song, on your mix, on your arrangement, listening to different pieces of the song together.
Man, it's so inspiring to mute the drums specifically and hear all the weird shit that's hidden below the drums. Like the producer clearly cared so much about the drums and the vocal, and like there's cool chords under here and cool squiggly synth lines or a guitar lead that's buried. I'm like, wait, what? That's the character. That's that nostalgic nod, that reference to something from your childhood, something from middle school that you were into, like in some sort of rock band. Or it's like, wait, why is that quiet? And then the normal like square wave synth is loud. It's like, what? Yeah. Everyone does the square wave synth. Like, let's get that gnarly guitar. Maybe we'll put a chorus on it and be more reminiscent of the 80s. Like, let's be specific about what our intentions are, what our frame point and reference points are.
That's a really good way to get into the arrangement, to really understand what's happening.
Just start muting things. So you can either solo or mute. I exist in solo just because I like to just keep adding things instead of unmuting things. I start the mix process with everything in all the time. So because I want to hear the song in its completion most of the time. So I exist that way. Then I'll start soloing things. You can mute things too. I don't, I'm just calling it solo mode. You can go mute mode too.
Yeah, I love that.
What else we got?
There were a lot of there's some compression versus limiting questions.
I don't know the answer.
There might be some. This is kind of in line with what we were just talking about. Sage asked about, and you can kind of take this wherever you want. I think maximum impact with low end without just distorting. Like, how do you make a clean, open low end sound?
Lower your volume, lower your faders, give yourself the headroom so you can actually have a 60 hertz and below cycle be made voltage wise. Like, let's be able to create that true voltage. And then today's song is a great example of that because it's non-existent in the rough mix on this song. But when I don't use that limiter, it's there. Right. So I didn't create the sub frequencies. They were there and they were being pushed out by a limiter, or maybe there was a filter on their mix bus. I didn't actually look. But something was taking it out. The production itself and the source material had all of that clean sub in it, but the rough mix did not. So how do I do it? I just lower everything to give myself 6 dB or so of headroom and get my gain structure right. And then I can just turn things up. Makes it very hard to recreate people's distorted clipping sound. But that's why if you want to recreate that, you got to learn tricks and techniques on how to recreate clipping, but in a more specific way, not an overall slammed mix bus way. And I think that's an art. I think learning how to, I think clipping is cool to a degree. I think it's part of people's sounds. And I'm not trying to say that clipping is lame or unnecessary. I actually don't mind it at all. I think we've been distorting things as long as we possibly could. You know, Ella Fitzgerald hits the mic too hard, it's clipping. Like, we all love that. It's emotional. Like, that's what we've been going for so long. This is just a new way of doing it. I don't really like analog digital plugin clipping, like the Pro Tools clipping, but there are plugins that clip that sound good. So you might have to remake that. But to get clean low end, to actually answer the question, you got to have headroom. There's only one. That's the only way.
It seems like it's very, very difficult to keep your low end clean and impactful if you're doing much mix bus stuff at all.
Yes.
That if you want to get that distorted, clipping, saturated, whatever, some version of that on, like you're talking about with the mix you're working on today, where it came in with a huge amount of mix bus stuff.
So much.
But then in order to achieve some of the impact and excitement you get from some of those distortions that are happening because of that, you actually have to go treat the sound individually. But then when you add them back up, if you take the whole mix and squish it down, it's going to do a certain thing. But then if you take the individual elements and do some distortion and saturation, you can then rebalance them in such a way where you have some of the excitement and density, but you can still have that big open low end.
Yeah, I have an overall answer to this, which is a good starting place, it feels like. Just thinking of three bands: low end, mid range, high end, like your car stereo, thinking about bass, mid, and treble. Is lower everything to give yourself headroom. Josh is asking what's a good amount. I don't know, 6 dB. And then turn up the low and the high elements, maybe 3, and leave the mid range the same, and just see what happens as a starting place. Everything down 6, low end, high end, to create that smiley face without doing it when it's already too loud and then it just starts getting harsh. Do that when you have headroom and just see what happens to the curve and how it pleases your ear and how much more you can turn the speakers up. That's kind of an advice thing, to try to do that and see where that takes you, see what story that begins to tell you for the mix. To put a number on it when you're asking how much headroom, I don't really have a specific. It's always different. Sometimes I wind up doing, if I did the math and I went down 6, I might have had to come up 3 more overall to get into the limiter to hit it the same way that they were, enough to be reminiscent of the rough. Like, it's not one size fits all, but I try to go down about 6 to see what I can get. And then you really use my ear as an A/B with the rough to find out what's missing because it's not hitting that limiter as much.
There was a question in the chat there about mastering, and said,
I saw that.
I'm curious. How much? The question was something like, how much do you leave for the mastering engineer in terms of compression limiting? And my question for you is
0.
On that is, are we just? And I don't know how many people that are watching have started working more than about 10 years ago, but now that we're in streaming and minus 14 LUFS. Are we actually even trying to get loud mixes anymore?
People are. Loudness is energy, right? So,
but if it's still getting turned down, talk about that maybe for me. Maybe that's a whole nother. Well,
let me answer the question at hand, and then I think the same person also finished that question by asking, "Is mix?" He said, "I've heard mixing is always subtractive and mastering is always additive," and I just want to completely say I've never heard that. Don't ever repeat that to anybody out loud.
Don't say it out loud.
Don't say it out loud. Mixing and mastering are both additive and subtractive. Whoever said that, if it's one of those like YouTube or Instagram ads saying I mix your song for $40, like that, I've seen those before. We need to disregard anything that those people say about mixing.
$40 is pretty cheap though.
I know. You're better off putting like the Ozone mix yourself thing.
I was going to say, if you have $40 to spend on, if that's your budget for mixing, you just mix the shit yourself. You go and spend a day on YouTube.
Buy the JST clip plugin or a Sketch cassette plugin. I think is the same. Like, find yourself a $40 plugin that's fun and inspires you.
And it's part of the reason we're doing this too. Is like everybody should be able to do a version of this. I mean, you can get to the point where someone like Jon, super mixer Jon Castelli can really go heavy with his experience. But these are all tools that are available to people. Like this is part of the reason
I just don't believe in alwayses. I don't believe in anything that, like, nothing is certain. The only thing that's certain is how uncertain we all are. Like there's no actual certainty. So why would we use always? I don't always put an EQ on my kick drum. I don't always do this. There's probably, like I think I said in the first episode, there's 4 things I always do. Bass drum, snare drum, vocal, and bass exist in the middle. That's my only rules of mixing. They can also exist in stereo, but they're mono. They always have to be, just so on iPhones and small devices, you know.
Yeah. Well, so you were talking for a minute about compression and limiting and mastering and loudness. I mean, so in my mind,
we always come back to loudness. It's like, do what feels good. If loud feels good, you make an EDM record, let it be loud. Just be careful. I mean, be dynamic and loud. You know, Tom Norris, one of my favorite mix engineers, is kind of killing at this. He exists 90% and above in EDM world. From Skrillex and Zed, did the latest Gaga record. Like, Tom's incredible. Tom somehow makes loud feel dynamic. I think he mixes too loud, and we've talked about this. It's not something I would say to him. I don't like overly loud mixes, but I don't put that on and say like, oh my God, it's offensive. You know, it feels musical. He's still injecting the right amount of chordal elements into it, and you can hear the vocal, and there's enough punch to drum, so it works. I mean, could it have more low end if it was less loud? Sure. But he's working in a clientele group that's expecting this. So, you know, it's like any sort of corrupt world, you know, top-down thinking. Like, I would love EDM to be quieter overall. I think you'd get some more emotional response from it. I think we went a little bit of a wrong direction in the loudness war with EDM, and I think it is too loud. But there are people like him that are still making it feel musical and dynamic. So if you want to mix loud, go for it. I just think that now with loudness normalization on these DSPs, you're going to get a result you're more thrilled with on DSPs if you mix quieter. And LUFS, again, back to just for people that don't know, is the average loudness amongst all the elements from start to finish between sections, right? So if your chorus has a max loudness of -4 and your verses are -12, then you have a -8 record, right? Over, you know, that's a broad stroke. We're talking average here. So you're also looking at peak loudness. If your peak loudness is hot in the chorus, but it feels right, and there's so much headroom in the verses, then you're probably all right. You won't get turned down as much, right? We're talking about average. So that's why it's a bit complicated.
Do they, is it over the entire file? Is it over a certain...
Entire file.
So could you theoretically have a louder song, a louder mix if you have a bunch of silence at the end of your song?
Yeah, but why would you do that?
So your shit slams? I don't know. A couple extra seconds, drop out?
No, we're talking about... No, I don't know the exact answer to this, but I would imagine that it's within 8-bar sections where they're analyzing average, not just leave a few seconds of silence. It also sounds really rude to your fan base and listeners to just have silence. It sounds... I don't know, if
the shit's that loud, they might need a break.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's not get it to be that loud where you're requiring a break, because, you know, these aren't problems that we'd want to solve in those ways. In better ways.
So and LUFS is weighted more toward low end in the sense that you can, the curve gives you more room in the low end. So actually, when you're making something with apparent loudness, since human beings have more sensitivity to mid-range, you can actually get a whole lot. For apparent loudness, on some level, you're sacrificing low end if you want it to be louder.
Yes.
So basically, your argument is, and I think I totally agree with you, if you turn down the volume a little bit, you can actually get bigger, fatter, more open low end.
Yeah, you absolutely can.
Yeah.
Like, that's exactly. More, yes, bigger, fatter. I want to use the word true, like actual low end that used to exist in... When I talk a lot about this in regards to R&B and hip hop music, the music that is based around bass and low end. And I get so bummed when I pop on a Mustard record or like a Ray Shremmerd record or something that's like, it should be fucking hard. And it's all mid-range in the drums, and there's no low end to the kick, and the 808 is so distorted that it's only the overtones for the iPhone, but you're like, wait, but this should go in a club in a car too, and also have those upper overtones. Like, we have tricks and tools to get that to work. I just want, like someone just put it, true and real low end. It's not even, to me, it's not even controversial. Like, we don't have to be scooping out low end so the needle doesn't jump off our record player anymore. Like that's been gone for like 6 decades. I don't understand why we're scooping out. And I see big mixers do this too on their mix with the masters, and I'm like, wow, I've never done that move, and I still get hired. I don't know why that people are scooping low end out. I know. Sorry, I don't want to say I don't know why. I obviously know why. I think it's the incorrect way to do things when you can create headroom, have dynamics, it be competitively loud, and everybody wins. It just takes more time, like I said.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, let's see if there's anything else. We got about 5 minutes left.
We got 5 minutes. Let's hit something else. And then back to mixing some trap. Shit goes hard. It's got so much sub. My air conditioning system is rattling up here when I'm mixing. It's sick.
There was a good. Oh man, there's a bunch of. Somebody
do you eat when you mix? I don't eat when I mix
either. No. I take breaks, and that's actually ties in nicely. Somebody asked before about breaks, how often you take breaks, and I think we mentioned in a previous conversation, but I take a lot of breaks. I mean, I think the ideal for me would be like 30 minutes on, and then a break for as long as I want to. Oh yeah, I think we should talk about reverbs and delays maybe another time, so we can dig into more of that. I like that conversation.
I don't use it.
Well.
Just kidding.
The idea of taking breaks. I take a lot of breaks. I try to go really hard for short periods. I mean, I've heard that about everything from creative work to practicing things, like doing really intense focus stuff and then letting your brain process it and get space from it. It's a really, really important part of the process. I used to go hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, and I might do 12 hours or something. I would do 10 hours without eating, without getting up. But then I learned later that I could have spent a total of 5 hours and taken breaks in between and just cut my time in half.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I've done the long days. I'm a 45 and out person. Take like 15. So on average, I try to do 45 of every 60. Sometimes it's 30. And the break could last 45 seconds. It's just like stop for a second, take a deep breath, look around, look at your phone, text someone, make a call. Like go get an espresso, make an espresso, do a jumping jack or 17. Like do something. Just
sprint a hill.
And dude, I would love to sprint a hill and come back and mix trap, like something super high energy. Actually, I might just sprint across my loft right now. I think it's like 150 feet from end to end. Like I could probably sprint across it.
Please get Josh to film
video.
That's good Instagram content right there.
But that's a good point, and we don't really need much time to discuss it, so we can kind of end on this. I think breaks are really important. Long and short. I think an hour break in between mixing the song for 8 hours is going to be more beneficial than powering through that last hour. I think you need to find time to break. I think that you come back, and I mentioned earlier the vocal up thing. And when something is in, do you car test every mix? No, I don't. I just got a car after not having it for 2 years, and I still haven't really listened to many mixes in the car. I listen to podcasts in the car.
I car test every mix
thing.
Yeah. Also because it's just fun.
Yeah, sorry, I went off.
You hadn't had a car in 2 years and just got one, so it makes sense that you wouldn't.
But I did bump a few things recently, and I was like, "Oh, that's fun." But back to the podcast. Yeah. But breaks are really important. I think that those vocal up notes that I get when I was talking about something's in the way. If I was taking more breaks, I might have recognized that I went too deep in those cuts that made the vocal not feel as present as maybe it should have been. And that's probably from fatigue, from going just a little bit too long. And I want to get better at taking more breaks when those kind of moves that are like, I got this mix I'm doing today to a really good point. And I told Josh while he's working to do a bounce for me while we're talking, so I can put it in AirPods right when we're done here. I can listen, be like, oh, how does that vocal translate? Because the vocal on the rough mix is way bright, like way Nicki Minaj bright, like to the point where I can't listen to it on my speakers. So I have to find that mix of that energy that I know that they're going to want, and the right amount of clarity too. So that's where I'm stuck on this mix. The rest of it to me sounds done. So I'm taking a really solid hour break with this, and then I'm going to listen for that specifically in that moment. And I had to be mindful enough to take that break on that specific thing. Like I know that that's the problem in this mix, and I don't want them to give me that note. So I'm trying to foresee that note coming because of how loud and bright the vocal was. So breaks are important in that.
Yeah, breaks are great. Well, we got 1 minute left here. Just want to thank everybody again. Check out the YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is Live with Matt Rad. The first 2 episodes and 3 clips, I think. Thank you to Francesco for working so hard on it again.
Congrats for pushing this through and doing it. Like you said you want to do it, you're doing it. I love that. Doing it.
And I think the podcast audio might be up on Apple. I just got the confirmation email, but we'll talk about that more going forward. And check it out, guys. Thank you so much for participating. Send us questions. Sorry we didn't get to everything, but we're going to keep doing this. Appreciate you guys very much. Love you, John. Let's go sprint soon.
Soon.
Bye, guys.
Peace.